Hi, I'm Mitsotakis, and this is Across the Balkans. Diplomatic channels between Ankara and Athens are much more open today than years past. That's how Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu recently described relations with Athens. Last month, Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis visited Istanbul, where he met with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The two leaders underlined the importance of dialogue despite their long-running disagreements. Relations across the Aegean Sea have seen their ups and downs ever since Greece declared its independence from the Ottoman Empire in 1830. During the 20th century, the two NATO allies also saw their interests clash on several occasions. But over the last 2 years, the two neighbors have been increasingly at odds over a number of issues, including competing claims in the Eastern Mediterranean and migrants. But these disagreements haven't stopped people from both sides of the Aegean from communicating, meeting, and even falling in love. Fay Doulgkeri met a couple in Athens to find out how they feel about frayed relations and whether recent steps taken on the political front can pave the way for reconciliation.
Katerina is from Greece and Aydin from Turkey. They met a few years ago, fell in love, and decided to move in together after the pandemic restricted their visits. Katerina works in the film industry, while Aydin is a musician who over the last decade or so has developed a taste for Greek music. They now live in the heart of Athens, in the teeming neighborhood of Gizi. Aydin gives accordion lessons and also plays for several bands. He says being a Turk in Greece isn't too big a worry, but that doesn't mean he is entirely without concern.
The period that I moved to Athens, we had the relations between the two countries, they were quite tense due to the crisis in the Mediterranean. But now I think about it, that was, at least for my life in Greece, for my new life, it was a minor thing. It had a minor influence in my life.
Katerina says she was more worried about sustaining a long-distance relationship than Aydin being a Turk. But then the jokes started pouring in, and that's when she began to ponder.
I started thinking about it because my friends, they were making lots of humor about it. So then I started thinking, okay, so I'm gonna have the humor of my friends. Which is humor though. So it's okay. It's totally okay. It just, through that, it made me think, okay, if it was another, from another country or something, it might have like or different type of humor or not at all or whatever.
Which kind of jokes they were making, for example?
The Greek Revolution, of course, for a bit of time.
Katerina says they would consider moving to another country if tensions between Greece and Turkey were to become worse.
They were like, oh, okay, where are you going? Where are you going? That it would be amazing, finally, that they will have a good relationship, and of course it will affect my life. I mean, as in everyone's. Not to have the fear above your head that something might come up or not, and then again, of course, like just to feel calm and relaxed that, okay, something is solved for a little bit.
The couple says Greeks and Turks have a lot more in common than they realize, so they believe, in theory, things should be much easier, but it's the politicians they distrust.
I would very like to be optimistic about it, but I am not that much. Like I don't think that this will last for a long time.
Why?
Why not? Because I don't know. I don't want to have my hopes up and then fall down again.
The thing is this, if the word was left to people themselves, of course this would have been very, very easy. I mean, apart from the well-known commonalities in food, culture, music, the way of thinking is very, very similar. And now that I am I'm learning Greek, I realized that if I translate an Turkish idiom to Greek, more or less I will be on the point, which shows that the mentality, the way of thinking of the two people, it is very, very similar.
And a joint poll conducted in December on both sides of the Aegean seems to support Aydın's case. More than 1,000 Greeks and around 3,000 Turks took part in the survey, and most of them held out hope that peace could settle all differences. The research also showed that Greeks are nearly twice as worried than Turks about a possible military confrontation.
Neighbours and long-time NATO allies, Turkey and Greece, have been at odds for years over a number of issues, including competing claims in the Eastern Mediterranean, migrants and a divided Cyprus. As the conflict in Ukraine intensified, the leaders of Greece and Turkey met in Istanbul under a very different climate compared to previous meetings. Tensions were all but gone, and according to sources, Erdogan and Mitsotakis agreed to address problems while continuing to keep dialogue channels open to enhance relations.
Konstantinos Filis is a professor of international relations and the author of several books on the issue. He says, while the signs are promising, hurdles still remain.
On our behalf, I presume that the Greek Prime Minister wanted to touch base with the Turkish President after a long time. He attempted to do something similar last August because of the Afghanistan developments, especially those related with the refugee migration issue. But this time it seems that it was a more successful attempt on our behalf. Rather than that, problems still remain. However, as we are neighbors, we are doomed to sit on the table and try and find solutions. In order to reach that point, we need a roadmap, because the first step has to be a de-escalation of tensions. And unfortunately, even after the meeting between the two leaders, we have not yet reached that point.
He also thinks that the conflict in Ukraine has made the need for a solution more urgent.
They should think twice of whether a crisis in the southern flank of NATO is going to help the Western alliance, the Western coalition that now needs to show its unity against Russia. This is the one thing. And the other is that because of the crisis in Ukraine, we have started realizing the obvious, that since we are neighbors, we have many challenges which are common and that we need to tackle, like the climate crisis, or the refugee migration issue, or issues related with energy.
Analysts say, as both countries are headed for elections in 2023, any further discussion should be deferred. And after that, it may well come down to a question of whether the political talks can, for once, reflect public sentiment.
So, can the two neighbors improve their relations, and how has the Russian assault on Ukraine impacted that process? To discuss this, I'm joined by Giray Sadık in Ankara. He is the director of the EU Research Center at Ankara Yıldırım Beyazıt University, and in Istanbul by Dimitris Triantafylou. He is a professor of international relations at Kadir Has University. Thank you both for joining us on Across the Balkans. Dimitris, let me start with you. Europe's security architecture has obviously changed with Russia's attack on Ukraine. Now, how significant is it for Turkey and Greece to cooperate when it comes to stability across the continent?
Well, I think it's very significant. And in March, we had a visit by the Greek Prime Minister to Istanbul, where he had lunch informally with the Turkish president. And part of the reason this meeting happened is because I think both leaders wanted to assess the implications of the Russian invasion on the European security architecture. And if one looks at the statement that was put out by the Turkish presidency right after the meeting, it specifically, I think the second paragraph, I think at some stage talks about that both countries have a special responsibility in the European security architecture, in particular in this part of the region, and that this provides opportunity for cooperation on a number of regional and bilateral issues. So the impact is there, and I think both Ankara and Athens understand that maybe we are entering maybe for a new phase where there's opportunity to cooperate.
Giray, as we mentioned earlier in the show, Turkish Foreign Minister Cavusoglu says diplomatic channels are more open now than ever before. Can Athens and Ankara improve their relations in the wake of conflict in Europe? And what areas should they focus on improving at the moment?
Turkish Minister of Foreign Affairs Cavusoglu remarks are very important, and I must say very diplomatically put. It's not only an opportunity framing, which is important, I agree with my colleague, but also it becomes a strategic necessity in light of developments in the Black Sea and Russia-Ukraine situation. Turkey is very important for the Black Sea security as well as Turkish straits. You cannot expect NATO to act unified while Turkey is being harassed in the Eastern Mediterranean by some allies. And therefore, that should be the beginning of cooperation from the Aegean to Eastern Mediterranean and the rights of Turkish minority in Greece, which is also important for Balkans and regional security.
Right, Dimitris, we've seen since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, NATO chief and NATO officials constantly talking about the unity of NATO countries. In that wake, we've seen this meeting we were mentioning in Istanbul between Greek Prime Minister and Turkish President. How urgent is it for both countries to find solutions for their own problems in the middle of this crisis?
Look, I think there are two approaches to the issue. The first one is, to enhance dialogue at different levels. For example, there's an ongoing positive agenda between the two countries. Deputy ministers from both foreign ministries have met two or three times. Ministers of tourism and the interior have also met to discuss bilateral issues and to enhance a positive agenda. And out of that meeting, also the Greek Prime Minister and the Turkish President, they came out with a game plan as to future meetings between the two countries. But that's one thing. That's confidence-building measures. That's trust-building measures. But they do not necessarily imply that the two countries can resolve their issues. Then there's the other approach, and the other approach is one has to tackle the maritime issues, the maritime differences that exist head-on, which neither country has been willing to do for a variety of reasons. Each, both in Ankara and in Athens, they have their own calculations. And unless there's a willingness to do this and really tackle those issues, and which it means that resolving them implies some sort of understanding, maybe even a treaty of good neighborly relations, which would once and for all put an end to the differences. And from the resolution of the maritime differences, a lot of other issues would be resolved, because that would be the maximum, the optimal trust-building exercise. Then we are basically looking at a piecemeal approach, which is something that has been tried repeatedly. It has worked. I mean, rapprochement process for 20 years was based on this, but it's not enough to resolve issues. But at least dialogue is enhanced.
Giray, the latest meeting between Erdogan and Mitsotakis showed some positive signs, yet, as we were mentioning, and Dimitris just mentioned it, no specific roadmap has been established. So how far away are the two leaders from reaching some sort of long-term agreement to address all their disputes? How do you see this playing out?
Well, first of all, the Erdogan-Mitsotakis meeting, I find it important in terms of having the leadership vision of positive agenda. So we are on the same page with my colleague. But with positive agenda, we should expect something more than wishful thinking. So that is very important. That positive agenda needs to be substantiated with the actions on the ground. Nobody is expecting a sudden resolution of all conflicts in a moment just because of deteriorating security situation in the Black Sea. But at the very least, that should lead to avoid further escalations in the Aegean and in the Black Sea. And also that confidence building measures between two sides can serve as a positive steps toward resolution of longer term issues, which looks like it is going to be a step-by-step process.
Right, Dimitris, how do you think this roadmap that we are still far away from could look like? What areas are we seeing some progress right now? And what remains the biggest sticking point for the Greek side?
Look, right now, the only area where there seems to be some progress is at the rhetorical level. From the Greek perspective, statements by Turkish leaders are monitored very carefully. And there seems to be, since the meeting, since the Mitsotakis-Erdogan meeting, there seems to be somehow, you know, a few decibels down in the rhetoric, the discourse, as to what either the Turkish Foreign Ministry or the Turkish Minister of Defense or others say about Greece. And that's constructive in terms of moving ahead. Of course, on the other hand, we just had my interlocutor talk about harassment by countries, and which does not help the dialogue. So one is discourse. Discourse is important. On the other hand, I think also both sides have to feel that they sit at the table as equals. And I think part of the Greek strategy right now is, A, to ensure that its deterrence is up to par. And therefore, because each country realizes this is a norm in international relations, that each country is responsible for its own defense. Secondly, when it comes to the crisis with Ukraine, it has provided Greece with an opportunity to show that it is a stellar member of the Atlantic Alliance and the European Union by taking part in all the actions that have been decided either at EU level or at NATO level, be it sanctions, sending military assistance, be it blocking the Greek airspace from Russian planes and so on, and taking all the appropriate measures. And showing that it's really fully committed to the alliance. Because part of the issue is that both countries, even though they're members of the alliance, we both joined in 1952 at the same time, on the same day, both countries, because of their geography, because both Greece and Turkey have been flank states and continue to be flank states, states with outer borders of NATO, and for Greece and the European Union as well, they never feel fully integrated, and therefore
Right.
this creates a lot of that tension that's out there. So I think from the Greek perspective, it's a question of Greece feeling secure in where it stands, so moving away from this neutrality sort of perspective to saying, okay, we are here, and therefore we also expect whatever obligations from our allies and partners are extended to us as we sit down and talk with Turkey, which is also a partner.
Dimitris, what kind of an approach, and will the approach change when it comes to Athens, and the approach especially towards Ankara ahead of the elections in Greece, which are scheduled next year?
I don't think it will change. First of all, Greece is still one of the states that's never said that it's opposed to Turkish membership to the EU. It's there. Greece thinks this is part of, this would help tremendously advance Greek-Turkish relations, because it would put Turkey and Greece within the same normative framework as a member state, with the same obligations and the same requirements as to how they act towards each other. So that's not going to change. Secondly, right now, barring the fact that, yes, we have all these exploratory talks and high-level talks as to how to resolve the maritime issues, but no one is actually moving forward. The two sides are not moving forward to create a framework. Therefore, Greece is also using, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there, the evolving energy dimension, which is not just it's not just hydrocarbons, but it's also the renewables and electricity connections and other things, which means that one can work at this at a multilateral level. There is the approach regarding the climate crisis, which is having an impact on both our countries. In a couple of months, we're into the summer, and we'll have forest fires again in both countries, and it shows that, you know, the climate crisis has
and
no
usually
border.
in these times, the two countries come together as they did in the previous fires. Giray, many have predicted an emotionally charged year ahead for Greece-Turkey relations, since, as we mentioned, both countries are having elections next year. Also, Cyprus is heading into elections next year. Do you think this will be the case? Are we looking into emotionally charged year again in the Athens-Ankara relations?
Certainly, that will not be something surprising to have that, especially considering the fact that in all those countries ahead of elections, how foreign policy issues become so politicized and used for domestic politics. I think the security situation in the Black Sea and Russia-Ukraine war should lead us to have as a sober reminder that we are in this region, we are neighbors, and we need to solve our issues without making, so to speak, those emotional charges a lot. But it takes two to tango on both sides. On Turkish side, from Turkish perspective, Turkey and Greece are equal NATO members. There is no problem into that. But within the NATO, there is also no need for additional security guarantees, as some allies trying to have additional reassurances with others, arming against others. This is not only harming regional security and confidence building, but also harming alliance solidarity and coherence within NATO, some grouping of allies against other allies, such as the Greek-French case against Turkey. When it comes to equality, Turkey is open to that and multilateral situations. Recent Turkish contacts at high level with Israel and countries in the Eastern Mediterranean can be interpreted in that direction as well. So Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey with the longest coast, and the rights of Turkish Cypriots need to be considered. Does have a say, so any sustainable solution need to keep that in mind, so that we can all be on the same page and have realistic solutions without leaving much room to domestic noises on both sides. Speaking of equality, in Cyprus there is Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, that also its rights and legitimate concerns need to be taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you both. As you've seen in our story at the beginning of the program, people from the both sides of Aegean would really appreciate these relations moving forward. As they say, they don't see many differences between each other. Thank you both again for joining us here on Across the Balkans on this panel. I do appreciate. It's time to look at some other stories making headlines in the region this week. Bosnian Serb leaders Milorad Dodik and Željko Cvijanović have been sanctioned by the UK for their attempts to undermine the legitimacy and functionality of the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The sanctions, which are the first ever imposed on Dodik by London, include travel bans and asset freezes. The UK's Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said both are deliberately undermining the hard-won peace in Bosnia, are being encouraged by Putin, and that their reckless behavior threatens stability and security across the Western Balkans. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan made a promise to his Serbian counterpart Aleksandar Vučić to sell his country combat drones. Speaking to reporters after Serbian forces recently concluded military exercises, Vučić said he asked Erdogan for armed UAVs, specifically the Bayraktar TB2 drone, which has seen recent success in Ukraine. After several postponements, Montenegro has adopted sanctions against Russia in response to its attack on Ukraine. The country is set to freeze assets of Russian citizens and companies and ban media outlets backed by the Russian government. Earlier, Montenegro closed its airspace to Russian planes and considered joining EU sanctions against Moscow. But Prime Minister Zdravko Krivokapić initially avoided implementing those measures. Montenegro's government is still in technical mandate as talks on forming a new government continue.
Naši protesti moraju da se nastave. Nema stajanja. Nema.
And now some inside news from our team. We are delighted to announce that our story about Serbia's mining scandal has been nominated for the One World Media Awards. In late January, Serbia's government revoked mining giant Rio Tinto's license for a lithium mine following weeks of protests. The decision drew hundreds of more protesters who were demanding Parliament adopt a 20-year-long moratorium on lithium mining. Our correspondent Axel Zaimovic produced the story for Across the Balkans from Serbia. Fingers crossed we get that award. Thanks for watching this episode of Across the Balkans. See you next time from me and my whole team here in Istanbul. Bye-bye for now.